summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said, "What is truth?" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
This last Sunday of Pentecost, this final Sunday before the Advent season begins, is not an ancient feast of the Church. This feast, called Christ the King, or more contemporarily, the Reign of Christ, came into being in 1925 through an encyclical of Pope Pius XI. In the wake of World War I, he thought it necessary to stem the growing tide of nationalism and secularism, particularly in Europe, with this reminder that Christ must reign in our hearts, minds, wills, and bodies. It was first observed on the last Sunday in October, perhaps as a counter to the Reformation Sunday in the Protestant churches, but was moved to its present date by Pope Paul VI in 1969, following the Second Vatican Council. And from there, it seems to have been adopted by Anglicans and Protestants alike as a fitting end to the liturgical year. This is kind of a hinge Sunday that rounds out our calendar of salvation. Over the course of each year, celebrates the events that show God's action throughout human history, centered in the birth, the death, and resurrection of Jesus. This Sunday poises us once again for a new beginning. Advent, a season which has a dual focus, both waiting and looking back to the past to celebrate Christ's birth, at the same time in anticipation of Jesus' return, when the promise of God's realm of justice and peace, already begun in Jesus, will finally be fulfilled. It's complicated, and that complication is displayed in the readings for today that you've just heard. There are the apocalyptic words of a prophet from the Hebrew Scriptures and also from the Revelation of John that are both awe-inspiring and terrifying. One coming on clouds of heaven, glory and power, majesty, as well as scary beasts. But then we move to the gospel, and here, where is the glory and the power? We see Jesus accused, arrested, and abandoned, standing before Pilate, responding to interrogation, seemingly beaten down and defeated. All of his ministry, his teaching and healing, his compassion for the most oppressed and afflicted seems to be hanging by a thread. You may have noticed that I included a few extra words in the appointed gospel reading, just a half verse at the end. It's where Pilate was asking Jesus if he is a king, and Jesus replies that his kingdom is not of this world, and that he has come into this world to testify to the truth. The words I added, Pilate asks, "What is truth?" What is truth indeed? In a world of truthiness, where leaders of our country claim to tell the truth when it's beneficial to them, a world with a truth that is stretched out of shape and context, twisted and distorted to fit a momentary purpose, just what does truth mean to us as we try to live a faithful life in the midst of such a world? In terms of Scripture, some traditions focus on the apocalyptic visions as the truth, capital T, the coming day of judgment when some will be saved and others will not. Focus on a future life after this one fades away. And there are many versions as to exactly how that is going to happen. These versions of truth sometimes turn to division, to inclusion and elevation only of those who share that same truth. They are used as weapons imposed upon others in ways that oppress and dehumanize. I don't believe that we are called to that kind of truth, but rather to a truth and therefore a power that is revealed through Jesus' life. A truth and a power that is humble, not self-serving. One that does not harm others for its own reward. And not so focused on a future life, but on how we are to live in the present. How to bring about that world of love and peace that he showed to all who knew him. How to come closer and closer, step by step, to the fulfillment of the kingdom that Jesus initiated through his time in this world. As preacher Caroline Lewis says, Jesus' kingdom was never a place, but a perspective. Never a rule, but a way. It's a way of life, or a way of love, as Bishop Curry has been telling us. A way of following the Jesus that we proclaim to be King. That way runs counter to the values and the indicators of success and power that surround us. And that is why Bishop Curry is urging the churches to enter into reflection and study of practices that can help us to walk and to live the way of love. And having his staff produce materials that can be used by the churches in their formation, programming, their prayers, and their spiritual practices. Bishop Curry's invitation to the churches said this: in the first century, Jesus of Nazareth inspired a movement, a community of people whose lives were centered on Jesus Christ and committed to living the way of God's unconditional, unselfish, sacrificial, and redemptive love. Before they were called church or Christian, this Jesus movement was simply called the Way. Today, I believe our vocation is to live as the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. Here at Grace, that will be possible during the Advent season. For 4 Sundays, we will gather in the parish house for an hour each time to learn how we might incorporate this way into our lives as people and into our common life as church. And I hope you might consider being part of this. Concurrently, each of our ministries is being asked to consider how their work intersects with the way of love, using the way of love as the lens through which to discern their directions. Pope Pius XI thought that authorities and Christians in name only were encroaching on the authority and power of Christ. In response, he set the Feast of Christ the King with the intent to reaffirm and refocus faith and respect in the kingship of Jesus, and to encourage the faithful to gain strength and courage from the celebration of the feast, as they are reminded that Christ must reign in our hearts, minds, wills, and bodies. This still rings true in 2018, I think, and Bishop Curry's initiative is not so very different. A different way, perhaps, no encyclical, no holy day of obligation, but a means by which we, ourselves and in community, can engage with and encourage each other by entering into reflection, discernment, and commitment around the practices of turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, and rest. I pray we will grow, he said, as communities following the loving, liberating, life-giving way of Jesus. His way has the power to change each of our lives and to change the world. And that's the truth.